get this far into things just now. Yeah,
Thank you.
you got it. Um, where was I? So obviously the people who say, let's just go over it again. The people who say that um, uh, physical pleasure is happiness, obviously those are the people who engage in the physical pleasure, right? That's their own psychology. That's their own understanding. So then his goal is to adjudicate these three claims about happiness, because he acknowledges these are just opinions in society. And what is philosophy all about? Philosophy wants to move from an opinion to fact or knowledge or real understanding. An opinion is just a belief. So he's trying to figure out, based on those three, which one is the real claim for happiness. And we may well disagree with him. And his answer may be a little more complicated than he lets on. What is his answer? What is his answer? What is human happiness for Aristotle?
Living virtually.
Is human
Okay,
nature, right?
yeah, living virtuously, or what he says, life in accord with virtue, or life with activity in accord with virtue. And if there are many virtues, the best and most complete ones. So in a nutshell, he says happiness is not a feeling. It's not a state of mind, although there may be positive feelings of pleasure and certain states of mind associated with it. He says the central aspect of living is a virtuous life, right? And
Yes.
then and that clarifies in book one what he means by happiness. So we discover things like happiness does not happen by accident. It's not about dumb luck, for example. So there's a synonym in Greek that we would all understand for happiness. The Greek word he uses is eudaimonia, right? And there's another Greek word meaning makarios. And the word makarios means like blessed, like blessed by the gods. So you see a person living an amazing life and they seem happy to you and you go, oh my God, you're makarios. You've been blessed by the gods. Look, you're like Job. You've got the children, you've got the house, you've got the cattle, you've got the flat screen televisions and all that stuff. But the whole concept of makarios, to be blessed, is something that's given to you by fortune, by chance, by good luck, right? Right, like winning the lottery. And and I think this is a popular conception in his time and in ours, that happiness falls on people by chance. They get good luck, right? And he doesn't deny that good fortune or good luck is a part of happiness, because you can't, you don't have control over everything in your life, right? That's one of the problems of happiness, and he acknowledges that. But what he has developed in book one is a conception of happiness that's about what you do and how you act, and less about good luck or fortune and things outside your control, and also less about it's about who you are and what you do, more than what you have, right? So living virtuously is acting in a certain type of a righteous or an excellent manner. And the word virtue raises some interesting challenges for us, because first of all, we don't use this word today, virtue, number one. Number two, when we do use it, we use it in the context almost exclusively of morality, right? So a virtuous person is a morally righteous person, right? And Aristotle would not disagree. The only catch is that the word virtue, or the Greek word arete, it literally means excellence. Excellence. So living virtuously is actually living excellently. It's not just being a do-gooder. It's about developing your potentials as a human being to the absolute fullest, which is a little different than, I don't know, being selfless toward other peoples. We think of virtuous people as selfless toward others, right? And then, so there's another problem, which is that we discover at the beginning of book 2 that there's more than one kind of virtue. If living virtuously is happiness, you realize then, so you start out, we all want happiness, and then you scratch your head and say, wait a minute, what is happiness? And then Aristotle gives you a definition. He says, happiness is living virtuously. And you go, okay, great, I got it. Now I can be happy. And then you're back to scratching your head and saying, well, what is virtue, right? Or what kinds of virtues are there? And in the beginning of book 2, he says there are moral virtues and there are intellectual virtues. Moral virtues and intellectual virtues. Does anyone want to untangle what those, in general, what moral virtues are and what intellectual virtues are? Moral virtue is the kind that we're all familiar with. And when we use that word virtuous, that's what we typically mean.
Professor, would it be like the intellectual one is the stuff that we learn, and the moral one are like our habits, what we actually do?
Okay, very good. So in books 2 and 3, he talks about how we, I think is beginning of book 2, he talks about how moral virtue is gained through training and habit, and intellectual virtue is gained through study. Let's take the easier one first. The study is like being in a classroom and learning from a teacher and reading books and discussing things verbally. You're thinking about things, you're thinking aloud, you're thinking with other people, you're thinking through reading, right? And intellectual virtue has to do with various faculties of the mind, like memory, like mathematical intelligence. So if we think of, today they speak of people having multiple intelligences, like one person is mathematically inclined, one person is musically inclined, one person is good in the humanities and reading, and the other is good in the sciences. So these all involve what Aristotle would call, we wouldn't use this expression, but it all involves different types of intellectual virtues, basically mental skills of thinking and reasoning and understanding, right? And if you look at book 6, he gives a robust analysis of what he's talking about when he says intellectual virtue, but we don't have time to read the whole book. So he says moral virtue is not something you learn typically in a classroom. Moral virtue is learned through habit, right? And we talked about this word beginning of last class or last meeting, because the word habit is ethike, ethos. It's derived from the word ethics, and it's connected with the concept of character. Your character is kind of like your moral fiber as a human being, right? And the reality is Aristotle makes clear that good character, being a righteous human being, being an excellent human being, doesn't come from you just being born that way. It comes from work. It comes from training. It comes from habit and habituation. And what does habit mean? Habit means a repetitious routine of a certain type of conduct that's based on, rules of etiquette that train you to do the right thing over and over again, right? And habit and this training uses the tools of punishment and reward, right? Everybody wants to get rewards and everybody wants to avoid punishments. And this moral training, or this training in moral virtue, starts not in the school or in the university. It starts in a household with parents trying to regulate the behavior of their children, right? To try to control their impulses, because the child's impulses don't see the consequences of their own actions, and the parents can see the consequences of climbing up the dresser or sticking their finger in the socket. So they've got to come up with a rule that says, don't stick your finger in the socket, because that's not going to contribute to your happiness. And, you know, they may punish the kid for having tried to do it, as opposed to them learning through getting electrocuted, right? You realize that one of the main functions of parents is to provide appropriate consequences for a child so that the child doesn't have to deal with real world consequences of their actions, which might be much worse. Because, and they don't, why do they do it? Because they don't know any better, right? Because they're testing things out. Yes. And, you know, for Aristotle, moral virtue is a mixture of emotion and intellect, and a substantial portion of acting the correct way is not about theorizing about what the right thing to do is. Most of it's about this training where it's a kind of repetitive habituation to do the right thing. If you think about what the military does when it takes people into boot camp, right? It basically dresses their psyche down and says, you know, this is who you are and this is what you're going to do, so that when they're in the heat of battle and they got bullets whizzing by their head and the average person is saying, get me the hell out of here, they stand by their comrades and fight, you know, courageously in battle, because they've been habituated in a profound way to, you know, through the discipline of the training. So Aristotle says happiness is living virtuously in a nutshell. Question: what type of virtue is better? How should we live? Should we live a life of moral virtue or a life of intellectual virtue? Which one is more important? Let's do this for a second. I was going to look at all this stuff. We can skip it. Oh, let me change the share here for a second. So in chapter 7 of book 1, Aristotle really gives his fairly robust explanation at that, up to that point, of what happiness is. And, oh, it's a roundabout way, so I'm not going to read it all, but right here, oh, I can't highlight it now because I've already highlighted it. Stinky. Let me make it a little bigger. So right here at about 16, he says, if this is so, then the human good. What is the human good? What is the human good for Aristotle?
Happiness.
Yes. So here's this funky thing that he speaks in different ways about the same thing. He says, if this is so, then the human good, aka happiness, becomes an activity of soul in accord with virtue, comma, and if there are several virtues, then in accord with the best and most complete one. So notice, he says, happiness is living virtuously, but caveat, if there are many virtues, then happiness is the one where we live activity of soul in accord with the best and most complete one. Now notice the word one, that's singular. And what's the problem? Let me fly back here for a second, if I can. To this page. So, you know, what is the human good or happiness? You see the human good. Well, it's activity of soul in accord with virtue. But if there are many virtues, it's activity of soul in accord with the best and most complete one. Well, what's the problem? Here we've got 11 moral virtues. We've got 2 types of virtues, moral and intellectual. And he seems to suggest that happiness is really activity of soul in accord with the best virtue, not just any virtue, the best one. Anyone figure out which virtue that is?
Intelligence virtue?
Number one, it's going to be an intellectual virtue. Why is that? This is an interesting question. Why is that? Why, for Aristotle, is intellectual virtue superior to moral virtue?
Because it,
Go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
I would assume that it's because, you know, you're studying to live your life based on what's in front of you, and you're learning how to live your life.
Okay, so that's a good observation. So here's the thing. There is, for Aristotle, there's two types of reasoning. There's practical reasoning connected with the moral virtues, and there's intellectual reasoning connected with the intellectual virtues. Practical reason, let's say this. In order to be virtuous as a human being, you have to use your reason, for Aristotle.
Mhm.
You have to use your reason. So we are not any type of animal. We are not just a plant that eats and grows. He says this in book 1, chapter 7. He says, we're not just a plant that eats and grows. We're not just a horse that eats, grows, and feels sensations of pleasure and pain. We're an animal that eats, grows, feels sensations, but we also have reason that codes the world morally and can understand things. So he says, what's the defining? He's basically set up an argument such that we'll figure out what human happiness is by being able to figure out what makes us distinctly human. And since human happiness is this distinctly human phenomena, which animals don't experience, by finding that thing in us that's distinctly human that animals don't have, we'll figure out what happiness is. And his answer is really simple. It's reason. And we do a whole set of things involving our reason. And therefore, all this moral training and intellectual study is the cultivation of our reasoning. And it's only when we reason well that we achieve virtue in any context, right? And it turns out there's two types of reasoning: practical reasoning and intellectual reasoning. And practical reasoning is fairly simple. It's figuring out in the real world the choice you need to make. And it has a lot to do with prudence and good judgment. Prudence or wisdom is a kind of good judgment in a circumstance where, like, the moral rules don't clearly dictate what the right thing to do is, right? You'll notice this is a book about morality. I mean, it's called ethics, but we would say morality. It's a book about how to live life the right way. And the one thing you'll notice is it almost never says, thou shalt not. It never says, this is what you should do. You would think most books that are trying to promote you doing the right thing would give at least a short list. No, I haven't taken attendance yet. At least a short list of do this, don't do that. Do this, don't do that. The 10 commandments, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, right? And in this book, there's only one little instance where he talks about a few things that are just like everybody knows they're forbidden without even having to think about them. And one is like murder, and the others, I think, like, you know, adultery with your neighbor's wife or something like that. So moral reasoning or practical reasoning, and the whole concept of practical reasoning, it has to do with reasoning about decisions in your life and actions you will take. Practical reasoning results in actions, you know, things you do in your life, choices you make that affect, you know, what happens in your life. Important. Intellectual reasoning is not for the sake of any action you take. So to come back to what you were saying, intellectual reasoning is simply for the sake of understanding, or what you'd call knowledge for its own sake, right? So all the purely intellectual virtues as opposed to the practical. You could call moral virtues practical ones, and in other books it's translated as practical virtue. So all the intellectual virtues result in knowledge and understanding, comprehension of the world, which is something that's passive by comparison to practical reasoning, which helps you make vital decisions that you act on, that you do something about, right? So to come back to this question, why does he see intellectual virtues as superior to moral virtue?
Because as human beings, we are able to use our full potential of our capabilities. Like,
And what is the key capability he's concerned with? We've talked about it.
um,
The general one. The use of our what?
our reason.
Absolutely. So what's the argument here? Why is happiness why does it have something to do with intellectual rather than moral virtue? There's some big questions here we'll raise in just a second about the relationship. Because for Aristotle, the intellectual virtues are our most complete use of our reason, the fullest, most developed. His whole model of happiness is not just something you have or something you feel. It's a process of developing who you are to its complete extent. And often the word that's used is human flourishing, right? Like plants flourish, they are fruitful and multiply, right? And to flourish is not something passive, it's something active. It's kind of like being an athlete. You have to train every day, you have to set goals, you have to try to get better, right? And so for Aristotle, it's not just doing these things, it's trying to do them as best you can, right? So he has this wonderful model of human happiness where like there's no what is it like just kind of going through the motions of life, right? With Aristotle, you cannot go through the motions and expect to achieve happiness. Doesn't work that way. You have to be pardon the expression, but you have to be something like an athlete of the soul. You're constantly in training, and it's not for the Super Bowl, it's for the fulfillment of your own potentials as a human being. And so this gets into an issue that for Aristotle, a full human being is really not just one born genetically as a human being with the physiognomy that we have, the physique that we have. For him, a full human being is someone who fully realizes those raw potential that nature gives them, and that that raw nature needs to be perfected. It needs to be trained. It needs to be educated, and that's what makes you fully human, because you've maximized your you could say your rational potential. And so what does he say in book 10? Because we don't have time to look at it. But in book 10, he says, the highest virtue is contemplation.
Hello, Dad.
I'm in the middle of class, sweetie.
I found your mask.
Oh, thank you.
It was behind near the radio.
Yes, I know.
Behind the cup.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good night.
Okay, Professor, she needs a reward for that.
Yeah, there was no video bomb there like other times. I think she just wanted to give me something because my mask wasn't lost to begin with. It's kind of funny. So yeah, she's in training right now, as I suppose we all are, even as adults.
Never stops.
Yeah, he says contemplation. And what is contemplation? It's a philosophical contemplation about the nature of things, right? Thinking and understanding. And for Aristotle, a philosopher, right? There's a little irony there. For him, contemplation is the highest form of activity. Remember, happiness is activity of soul in accord with virtue. And the virtue that he's identifying as the highest one is contemplation. And then the other thing is, it turns out that a lot of moral virtues are practical in the sense that they just help get you by in life. It turns out that a lot of the moral virtues, Aristotle subordinates our human needs, or I don't want to use the word subordinates. He puts our needs at a lower status than the good life. So we have a whole set of animal needs that to pursue them is necessary for our survival and our well-being, but they don't really constitute our happiness. Like we need a roof over our head, we need 3 meals a day, we need our health, but not, these things are all preconditions for happiness, these needs, but they're not happiness itself. If you have all these things satisfied, that's not the same as happiness, right? And it turns out that the moral virtues, a lot of them, they're involved in doing right by other people, but in many cases, doing right by other people satisfies many of the needs that you have in life. Like, I don't know, you go to work, and why are you proper at work? Why do you mind your P's and Q's, and why are you nice to everyone? Because you need the paycheck, and you know that lurking behind all that good conduct is the kind of noose around your neck that you've got the bills to pay and so on, and you can't afford to lose the job. So you do the right thing for very practical and self-interested reasons. So contemplation is this realm in which we've satisfied all those basic needs, and we've risen into a level of, you might say, a kind of higher plane, right? I mean, if you think about what liberal education is that it's not supposed to be just professional education. It's not supposed to just give you the skills to go and make money. It's there by definition, a liberal education that a college is supposed to provide. Here we are in a gen ed class, which is like kind of it's a kind of pedestrian name for liberal education. The goal of a liberal education is to produce a liberal human being, which is, in this context, a well-rounded human being in which all the facets of their intellect are developed, right? So that's why, I don't know, to put it simply, you've got humanities over here and you've got the sciences over here, which are expressions of two different modes of thinking and understanding or reasoning that our souls or our brains are capable of engaging in, right? So,
So to achieve your goal, where will you categorize?
pardon?
In order to achieve your goal, would that be considered moral because it's habitual? If I want, for instance, like my goal is to make a certain amount of money, so I have to work hard and educate myself in order to achieve that goal. Where should I categorize that?
I mean, it all depends on what the goal is. I mean,
Mhm.
Aristotle has a clear hierarchy here, right? Moral virtue on one hand starts to seem like an end in itself, right?
Mhm.
An end in itself is the goal, but it turns out that intellectual virtue for Aristotle really is the highest. I mean, let's put it bluntly. I think for him, it's the highest form of existence. And I think many people are going to say, what you talking about, Willis? Right? That's not my vision of the
I
highest form of existence. But if you put it in really simple terms of the logic of his argument, it makes sense, because he says reason is the kind of crown jewel of the human being, because it's what animals don't have. And the fullest use of our reason for him turns out to be the intellectual virtues, and particularly the best and most complete one, contemplation, right? All the other things are more animal needs rather than distinctly human needs. If we're engaging in courage, moderation, all these moral virtues right here, courage, moderation, liberality, greatness of soul, ambition, gentleness, if we're engaging in all these virtues in order to satisfy our basic needs, we're still only satisfying, in many cases, needs that are no different than other animals, right? Morality almost exclusively, with the exception of your relationship with yourself, morality involves engaging with other people and acting correctly in relationship to them, right? So, which is to say, morality is intrinsically social, right? And it's part of our social fabric. And in that sense, you know, animals certainly have social lives, and they certainly engage in certain types of, I mean, obviously they don't have virtues like we do, and these virtues involve a type of intelligence that they don't have. But that's why the intellectual virtues are considered superior. Question: to be happy, can you have intellectual virtues without moral virtues? This is one of the great questions of the ethics, and many commentators think they know the answer. And I don't think it's nearly as clear as they do.
For me, no, we need both.
Let me just put it this way. What are we talking about if we're saying that someone can achieve happiness by attaining the intellectual virtues without the moral virtues? What are we saying? Put that in like ordinary speech.
Could you repeat that, please?
What are we really saying? So one of the classic arguments or questions about the ethics is, does a person have to have both sets of virtues in order to be happy? Right? So if the intellectual virtues are superior, and those are the ones that really constitute happiness, do we need do we need the moral virtues at all to be happy? And let's imagine a situation in which what we call happiness is someone who has intellectual virtue without moral virtue. What kind of person would that be? What would they be like?
They'll be perfect.
I'm not sure the average person would call them perfect. Somebody's got their hand up there. So, I mean, you know, I don't know. Let's say person with intellectual virtue is some kind of genius. I don't know. They're like a physics whiz or something. What does a person look like if they lack moral virtue? Are they a good person or a bad person?
Bad, because they don't respect.
Bad.
Yeah, let's just say this person is an evil genius, right? I mean, that character is one that's kind of we have in our pop culture, right? They're wickedly intelligent. This person can engage in contemplation and understand the world in a profound way in which your average nice person can't. But they have no scruple. They have no moderation. They have no friendliness. You could just run down this list of virtues. They lack the virtue of justice, for example. I don't know if you want to make that person your friend, right? Anyone who lacks justice, how are they I don't even know how to turn this off now. This silly thing. There we go. If they lack justice, they're probably going to screw you over. So why would you be their friend? So does anyone think Aristotle can have, given that intellectual virtue is superior, do you think there could be a situation in which someone can achieve happiness and be like an evil genius, cultivate their reason to the maximum, you know, in their studies, but they don't treat other people well? Can that person achieve happiness?
I believe so, because although they're not treating
I'm talking about, I'm just saying within the context of Aristotle's argument.
Oh, okay.
And your own opinion. So Cynthia says yes. Jim says no. Dalen says no. Right? So I think our natural reaction is to think that, I mean, we are whole human beings. Our intellectual life and our moral life can't simply be disconnected. Our moral life involves our relationships with everybody else and maybe even ourselves. And this issue of friendship with oneself comes up in book 9, and it's quite fascinating, right? So it seems just on the logic of what's presented that if you had intellectual virtue, you'd also have moral virtue. I figure if you had intellectual virtue, you would have the sense to act righteously if for no other reason it was practical, right? You can see like murdering and raping and pillaging is not really particularly advantageous to you. Certainly not going to give you more time to engage in philosophy if contemplation is the highest form. But what's interesting is Aristotle never makes a claim where the true happiness involves both of them, both types of virtue kind of like working together in sync, which I think, probably most people's impression of what you'd have to have for happiness. Okay, good. So just one other thing before we move on from happiness here, and then I'll take attendance. Let me see if I can get this thing to work. I've got so many things open here. No. Okay, keep going. Okay. So happiness. Now I'm going to pose a trick question. Is activity in accord with virtue or virtuous living, is that the only thing we need to be happy?
No. We
The
need
answer is no.
no.
It is the main thing. It is the kind of crown jewel of happiness, virtuous activity. But there's something else you need in order to make virtuous activity possible, and a couple conditions that come with happiness. What are they? Does anyone remember? We didn't talk about them last class or this one. Maybe people remember from videos. Okay, so I'll read it. I'll read it again. So if this is so, then the human good becomes activity of soul in accord with virtue. And if there are several virtues, in accord with the best and most complete one. In book 10, chapters 7 and 8, that becomes clear. It's contemplation. But he adds a caveat. He says, but Aristotle is a but monkey, right? He adds a but. But in addition, in a complete life, for a swallow does not make a spring, nor does one day. So what do we need to be happy? He makes it pretty clear here. Virtuous activity and what else?
Time.
Pardon?
Time.
Yeah, we have to clarify that. Let's just be clear. He says in a complete life. And so then our question is, what does he mean by a complete life? And there's two aspects to it, and one has to do with time. So he says this very funny saying, for a swallow does not make a spring, nor does a day. And it has to do with time. What is he saying there?
That to come to obtain a complete life, it takes time.
How much time?
It could be a whole lifetime.
Okay. So let's ask a stupid question. It says, one spring does not make a day. How many days make spring? And I don't mean literally the number, because of course nobody has that at their fingertips. How many days make spring?
3 months.
Yeah, not one day, but 3 months of days, right? So if we're going to achieve happiness, we're going to do it in a context of a complete life in which We're acting virtuously, what? Not for a single day, but for the duration of our lives, right? I just saw the other day, like something like, I don't know, an all-star doesn't play great for one season. They play great for their whole career. So if you think about it, think about happiness as like going to the Hall of Fame, right? Um, there are those players who some point in their career, they had like the stellar season and they got to the all-star game and they were MVP, they won the championship and on and on and on. And everybody thought, oh my God, this person is like the next Michael Jordan or whatever. They go into the Hall of Fame. And then it turns out years later that they only had a couple years out of their whole career that were really stellar, right? And those people might have been really good that year. They might have won the MVP, but they don't go in the Hall of Fame, right? So happiness is like making it to the Hall of Fame. You can't just live virtuously one day. So look at your clock. Oh, I did it. I'm gonna clock out. I'm done being virtuous. Now I'm gonna do the fun stuff. Actually, I mean, it should be fun, but so you have to do it consistently for a whole life. And so in these subsequent chapters, he talks about exactly how long. He says, well, what happens if you die young? And he says, well, actually, that's no good because honestly, if you really want to be happy, you have to kind of show the goods of virtue over the long haul, right? And then he says, well, what about after death? And I mean, he even evokes the spectrum of like life after death, going to heaven and hell, and so on. And the Greeks have their equivalent of heaven and hell, the Greek pagans, because they're not Christians. And he says, no, 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 it's just one lifetime. And basically, he concludes that, not only do you have to live virtuously every day, but you also have to live long enough to really have fully matured as a person. And the Greeks, Aristotle, Plato, is part of the Greek general kind of common culture that there were, various stages to a human being's life. And there was a certain stage at which they recognized like a kind of full maturity. And if you think about the concept of maturity, it's very similar to this concept of happiness, which is flourishing, which is cultivating all your abilities and kind of maximizing them. That's another way of talking about maturing or flourishing, right? There's all kind of synonyms. Okay, so virtuous activity, a complete life in terms of time, duration of your life. But there's one other element to a complete life. Does anyone know what it is? Any thoughts? We want to get on to friendship because it's some interesting things said. Okay. The other element of a complete life is that you need stuff. Remember we talked about 3 types of goods: external goods, goods of the soul, and goods of the body, right? And here he particularly talks about, you see at the bottom of this page, external goods as necessary to achieve happiness. Kind of a stupid question, but why do you need, what does he mean by external goods, first of all? What do you think he means?
Could it mean material things?
Yeah, material well-being, right? We need stuff. We need wealth, not in the sense of like obscene riches, but we need the basics to satisfy, our animal needs, right? We need a roof over our head. We need money to buy us the thing. Think about what our bodies do. Our bodies generate needs all the time. Our lives generate needs all the time. And we need those needs to be satisfied. And many of those needs are satisfied through material well-being. And we're not talking about being stinking rich. We're talking about just satisfying those basic needs. Because if those needs aren't satisfied, what does it mean? It means you're spending your whole life dealing just with, rolling the rock up the hill of trying to get them met. And you never have time for anything else, right? You can see here Greek, Aristotle lives in a world where, elite people have leisure time. They have leisure time to study, whereas we're spending all our time working and paying the bills and accumulating our external goods. So he says, nonetheless, it manifestly requires external goods in addition. There we go. As we said, he says, for it is impossible or not easy for someone without equipment to do what is noble. When he's talking about equipment, what does he mean? Equipment for what?
It doesn't have to mean like actual equipment. Could it mean like
Well, he doesn't mean like a baseball helmet or a fishing rod. That's true.
right, could it mean just
Resources?
like knowledge or something? Just having I don't know. I don't know.
No, I think he's talking about physical stuff.
Oh, okay.
So I think the equipment is the external goods, but he acknowledges in most cases it's external goods. He acknowledges here with this concept of equipment that they are that our goods we have are like tools that we use to be able to act in the world, right? And if we don't have this stuff, we can't do what is noble. And noble here is like a synonym for moral virtue, right? We can't act with moral virtue unless we have a foundation of goods where our basic needs are already taken care of, right? And what are some of the instruments or some of the equipment that he actually talks about? He talks about friends, wealth, and political power, right? So these all become tools that allow you to get by and at least in his world, navigate that world, right? That are not the things that directly contribute to happiness, but they provide the foundation of a life that allows you to achieve happiness. So notice here that this wealth or these friends or these connections, right? That's kind of what he's talking about here. They're not happiness in and of themselves, but they're the kind of springboard to it. He says, those who are bereft of some of these, for example, good birth, good children, or beauty, disfigure their blessedness. For a person who is altogether ugly in appearance, this is actually pretty funny what he says, because I don't think he totally means it. For a person who is altogether ugly in appearance, or a poor birth, or solitary and childless, cannot really be characterized as happy. And he is perhaps still less happy if he should have altogether bad children or friends, or though he did have good ones, they are dead. Dead friends are not much help to you, even if they're excellent people. He says, just as we said, then happiness seems to require some type of external prosperity in addition. This is why some make good fortunes equivalent to happiness and others virtue. So notice what he says here. Notice what he says. He says, this is why some people make good fortune equivalent to happiness and others virtue. Well, which one is happiness for Aristotle? Is it good fortune or is it virtue? That should be an easy question.
Virtue.
Good
It's
virtue.
virtue. And what has he just described here in this paragraph? He's described many things that are endowed on you by good fortune or good luck, right? Good birth, being attractive, having good kids. You can't, all these things are out of your control, right? So actually, he doesn't seem so concerned about these things because he's concerned about virtue. And virtue is the thing that you have in your own control, at least to the best of your abilities, right? It's like Bill Belichick, the coach of the Patriots. He always talks about the player has to deal with the things that are in their control and not be concerned about what they can have no control over. And it's actually a very good life lesson. So the real irony here is one of Aristotle's great models for human happiness seems to be Socrates. And Socrates was a philosopher who was the teacher of Plato, and Plato was the teacher of Aristotle. And there's this kind of succession and generational connection. And then on the other hand, the irony is Socrates was not of high birth, right? He wasn't like bloodline nobility. He wasn't anybody special in terms of his birth. He wasn't born into money or royalty or anything like that. Number two, Socrates was really ugly, right? Number three, from what we learn, like in the Platonic dialogues where we get pictures of Socrates, and we'll see him in the symposium, which is why I'm talking about him. Like he didn't have great kids. They weren't like off doing great things, because you can try to train your kids to be wonderful, but sometimes they're just born that way. And, you know, you have brothers and sisters in the same family and they all can act very differently and have very different sets of principles just because they're different natures over which, you know, parents have no control. So a complete life is a certain amount of time and having a certain amount of stuff in order to act virtuously, but you only need enough stuff in order to act virtuously. And there are some moral virtues like liberality. Liberality literally means like a kind of generosity. And someone who's liberal gives generously to other people to help them out. And what are they giving? They might be giving money or stuff that they have. So if you don't have stuff, you can't engage in that virtue. Like myself, I can't be very liberal outside of my own family. Okay. Let's go forward to book 8. Okay. So Aristotle spends a lot of time on human happiness, living virtuously in a complete life. We've all got that like cold. Question: what's the relationship? I mean, this book, Ethics is about the science of human happiness, essentially. Within the ethics are two absolutely vital chapters on friendship. Obviously, then there's a connection between friendship and human happiness. Really important. What do you think the connection is? How does friendship contribute to Aristotle's understanding of happiness? Any thoughts?
We need companionship and we need each other to exchange things.
Okay, good. So one of the interesting things we discover is that Aristotle sees all relationships as a form of exchange, right? Which is to say, I give you this, you give me that. And there's two important features of it. Number one, we have different motivations as to why we're giving what we're giving. And then we also have different objects of exchange. depending on the type of relationship that you're engaged in. And I think one of the most amazing observations by Aristotle is for him to identify that all relationships, whether we call them friend, because notice, we'll notice that the way he uses the word friendship, I mean, what kinds of relationships does his idea of friendship include?
Wait, Professor, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, what kind of relationships does Aristotle consider a friendship? Is it confined, for example, to BFFs when he uses this word friendship? What are the three types of friendship that he talks about in Book 8?
Oh,
Utility, pleasures, and I think the good.
Moral support.
Is
Complete
the one for
friendship.
good, complete friendship and
Okay, he
Friendship
talks
of-
about complete friendship. That's one.
friendship of pleasure
He talks about friendship based on pleasure. Good.
and friendship of utility. Yeah.
And then friendship of utility, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're all based on three different objects of exchange. In the friendship based on utility, you exchange that which is useful. In friendship based on pleasure, you exchange pleasure back and forth. And it could be physical pleasure, could be like sex, or it could be some type of pleasure of the soul. Like, for example, he talks about, oh, that person makes me laugh. That person is witty. And that's a pleasure that's not like a bodily pleasure. It's a psychological pleasure. So a pleasure of the soul would be some type of psychological, makes you feel good, right? And then complete friendship, which is interesting because it's not defined by what you exchange. When you talk about friendship of utility, the thing that is exchanged is something useful to you, something that you need, that's practical. In friendship of pleasure, what's exchanged? Pleasure. One person gives the other person pleasure. And then complete friendship, the name of it, the name of the type of friendship is not called by what's exchanged. So then the question is, in complete friendship, what is exchanged? Did anyone figure that out?
love.
I think we have to, I don't disagree with you, but I think we have to be more specific.
Love as in
How does you know that all those sayings like
Acceptance.
love is not words, love is, how is love manifest in a relationship?
by both parties achieving, by wanting good for both, for each other.
Okay, yes, he says that in complete friendship, the people involved want the best for the other person. And that has to do with the intention of the relationship. And that's actually very important because in the other two, they don't care about the other person, we discover.
Professor, I had my hand raised, I'm sorry, but that's where I was getting, like, I was concerned about that part. Like, when it gets to a point where it's only benefiting one, do he speak on that? And also, in Book 8, what chapter specifically? I'm trying to find it and I just can't.
Yeah, we're going to look at it.
But that was my question. Like I understand like one has to benefit, like friendship or whatever, it has to benefit both parties, but then when does it change? And
Okay. So
when does it only benefit one?
you ask a very good question. So
Okay.
we're still on the question of what is exchanged in complete friendship,
Oh,
right?
sorry.
So, but let's take a step back. In chapter 8, he gives like just a conceptual analysis of these three categories of friendship. And he also talks about many other types of relationships, right? He talks about mothers and their children, fathers and their sons, kings and their subjects, masters and slaves, husbands and wives, a whole range of relationships that all seem to come under this rubric of friendship. And here he's just giving an explanation of what, just like there were 3 categories of happiness, now there are 3 categories of friendship. Actually, they're quite similar in a lot of ways. And here he's just explaining them. And we're not completely looking at like a real world relationship that's being analyzed. It's just like 3 conceptual categories. In book 9, he's going to start talking about the problems of relationships and the real world challenges we face when we enter into relationships, which I hope we touch on before the end of class here. Right? So he gets to all that stuff, and that's probably the most interesting section of the text. And he gets to it in book 9, and we'll look at that in a little bit once we've fleshed out these 3 types of friendship a little more clearly. What's exchanged in complete friendship?
Could it be wisdom?
It could be, and I don't disagree with you, but there's something more specific he says in book 8 about what's exchanged. Anyone else want to go for it? What is exchanged in complete friendship?
Goods.
Okay, so in all 3 relationships, a good is exchanged. What is a good for Aristotle? A good is anything that you think is beneficial to yourself. And notice it's anything, and also notice that you think it's beneficial. You don't always know it's beneficial. It's like, you know, those hard drugs, man, that will make me feel real good. You're actually acknowledging that it poses to be some type of good, but you're failing to recognize the part that's not beneficial to you. So all relationships are based on exchange of a good, something you want. And that's why there's a relationship to begin with. So to come back to that point, in all relationships, there is a good exchange of some type. It's physical or non-physical. It's tangible or intangible. It could be speech. It could be conversation. It could be emotions. It could be, what's the word? Help, right? A friend in need is a friend indeed, right? You could be providing assistance to a friend to help them out in a tough time. The 3 categories of friendship define the different types of goods that are exchanged in broad categories in each. Anyone else want to try complete friendship? What's exchanged before we start reading it?
Sorry, what was the question again, Professor?
What is exchanged in complete friendship?
Can loyalty be one of them?
So Jim mentions equality and trust and loyalty. All 3 of those things are going to some degree, to varying degrees, are going to be at play in all the relationships. If we don't have sufficient equality, we're not going to be interacting with the person. If we don't have sufficient trust and loyalty and trust are connected, we're not going to engage with that person. If we don't, whatever we're putting in there, whenever we enter a relationship, we're putting ourselves in the other person's hands to one degree or another, more or less. And that always involves a certain amount of trust. And let's put it this way. Complete friendship would probably have the highest level of trust, the highest level of equality, the highest level of loyalty compared to the other 2.
Exchange
Professor, I would go
happiness?
It has something to do with happiness at the end of the day. Let me ask this. What kind of person can everybody be engaged in complete friendship as Aristotle describes it?
No.
No. What kind of person do you have to be to engage in complete friendship?
I was gonna say the one-mindedness, like-mindedness.
Okay, that's true. So this concept of homonoia, well, that's the Greek anyway. Birds of a feather flock together. right? Aristotle has a line, friends
I
are two bodies and one soul,
I agree.
right? So, some of the early discussion he has are things really simple that we all understand that we don't have time to look at. But he says, do likes attract, or do opposites attract? And his answer is kind of like both and.
Yeah.
Why do opposites attract? Because you have something I don't, and I need it. And since you're different, you have these attributes. And since I'm different, I have these attributes. And there's a kind of complementariness. They're complementary to one another. So he kind of says yes. But then on the other hand, he acknowledges that people who are the same also are attracted to each other because they have a greater understanding of each other because they're similar, and they see more of themselves in the other person. And since they like themselves and they can identify with themselves, obviously they can better identify with the other person because they see part of themselves in that person, right? And love and friendship for Aristotle, we'll read it in a second, seems to be connected with knowledge of the other person, right? You can't really be a deep friend. This word, the Greek word for friendship here is philia, like Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. And the word friendship can be translated as either love or friendship. The Greek word can be translated. So depending on how it's used, we see many relationships he depicts are very casual. Many of them are kind of like business relationships. They're like partnerships. They're where people are kind of using each other knowingly. They're not trying to exploit one another, although they could, to get what they want. And the relationships are more like networking or acquaintances. But then when we get to complete friendship, we get something that's more serious. And actually, eventually, he's going to say that, in fact, only complete friendship is real friendship. And the other ones, we call them friendship, just like the character in Juno Diaz. He says, yeah, these guys are my friends. But in fact, they're not real friends at all. It's just the word you use in casual conversation. So by the end of book 8, he actually is going to say that complete friendship is the only real form of friendship. And the other things are types of networking to get our needs fulfilled. Let me go over this and talk a little bit about, because this will make, when we read the text, it will make it much more intelligible. So he lists in a kind of haphazard way a series of conditions that are necessary for people to engage in relationships. And they're not all absolutely necessary or in equal amounts. But the more you have of these 7 things, the more likely you're going to have a stronger relationship. And remember that these 3 different types of relationship or friendship are not created equal. There's a kind of hierarchy from the more serious, complete friendship down to the friendship based on utility, right? So, what compels us to have relationships? The first is lack of self-sufficiency, or we have needs, which is to say our nature. We saw this in the politics. What does it mean to be self-sufficient? What does it mean to be self-sufficient?
You can do things on your own.
Yeah, it means you have needs as a human being. Every day, your body and your life is generating needs, and you can satisfy those needs all on your own. And if you were truly self-sufficient, you wouldn't have to rely on anybody, right? But of course, in the real world, human beings are not self-sufficient. They're dependent. Who are they dependent on? Other people, because that's the only way they can satisfy all their various needs.
And Professor, can that harm the other person?
Well, it depends on what kind of dependency you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And so we depend on people, I don't know, for cash, for favors, for this or that. But then there's certain things we depend on that only the other person can offer. Like we want them not for the stuff they can provide. We want them for themselves, right? We want them as an end in them for their own sake. Like I care about, my loved one, not because of what they give me in terms of, I don't know, financial resources. I care about them for who they are and what kind of person they are, right? So you would still be, if you cared about them for that reason, you'd still be dependent on them, which is to say you need them in your life. Like everybody needs kind of person in their life. Aristotle acknowledges that relationships are born out of dependence. Of course, there are types of dependence where you're putting too much of a burden on the other person. And we'll talk, and that really has to do with the nature of exchange, which we'll talk about more in a second. He says, then you need this thing called goodwill. And goodwill is not anything special. It's not like, oh my God, I'm self-sacrificing. I'm going to save you from all your troubles. Goodwill just means I have a positive attitude toward you. I'm open and reasonably trusting toward you, and I'm willing to do business with you. And goodwill is simple. Like you go into a store to purchase something, and the both of you trust that you're going to give them the money and that they're going to give you the product that you just paid for. And there's not going to be some kind of scam going on, right? And of course, that's a level of goodwill that we have every day with complete strangers. And if you think about it, goodwill in Aristotle's context, it suggests a basic level of trust that society needs to have in order to function, right? And you realize that since we're dependent on one another, we have a motivation to be trusting because both sides of the equation need something. So we're not inclined, or not typically inclined, to screw the other person over because we don't want to disrupt the exchange, because the exchange works when we trust each other normally. So then we have an exchange of goods. Aristotle makes a really interesting point here, that if there's no exchange between people, between two people or whatever, however many, if there's no exchange, there's no relationship, right? If you're not getting something from the other person, you're not involved with them. So that means if you're involved with somebody, there's something you're getting from them. Whoever it is, right? The guy on the street, or your boyfriend or girlfriend, or your family member, or your BFF, or whatever it is, there's something you're getting from them. We don't, as human beings, given our lives are constantly generating these needs, we don't have the luxury of just sitting around and not having our needs met. We need to be around the people who are meeting our needs. And in a sense, Aristotle acknowledges in a delicate way that we have to use other people, right? We have to depend on them for our needs. And of course, we return the favor, and they know that we're depending on them in an open and trusting relationship. Oh, sorry. Reciprocity of exchange. What does that mean, reciprocity? When something's reciprocal?
I think it's like mutual.
Yeah, mutual. So if exchange is mutual, it means I give to you and also you give to me, right? Or I get a favor from you and you get a favor from me. That it's a two-way street and it goes both ways. Of course, the problem is we're all thinking about those relationships now immediately, where one person is the giver and the other person ain't getting nothing in return, and yet they're staying around in the relationship, right? And that's something that comes up in book 9. Aristotle's going to say the wise person, when the reciprocity of exchange breaks down, when exchange is just a one-way street, the wise person doesn't stay in that relationship. And Aristotle has no deep sentimentality in situations that kind of don't meet the basic obligations of a friendship. Equality. Equality is a real interesting one, and it's similar to like-mindedness. The more equal you are, it's more likely you'll be like-minded. You'll be the same, have more things in common. Of course, there's equality of exchange, but then there's also issues of equality of status, right? He talks, for example, about like a master and a servant and a king and their subject. You think a king and their subject can be friends? Two
No.
people who are radically unequal, right? What did someone said something? I missed it.
Oh, I said no, they can't be friends.
No.
Okay, no, lots of no's. You might like Barack Obama, but if he came over to your house, would he be your real friend? And I'm not saying he's not a nice guy. I'm talking about the fact that he's president of the free world. Why doesn't that work? Two people of radically different status. Why can't they be friends?
Because they're gonna
Sometimes
always
opposite attract, maybe. I don't know.
there's always gonna be
Because they might
conflict.
have different point of view, Professor.
Right.
Yeah, and how does that tie into their different status? Cynthia says because they're not on the same level. I agree. All right, I'm coming over your house. I'm the president of the United States. I've been around the world. I've been on Air Force One. I've got millions of dollars. What do you have to offer? Me,
Nothing?
the president. Yeah, jealousy. A good one. Yeah, so you see the problem. The elite person has something to offer the little person, which is us, in this case, all of us. And we don't have the same thing to offer them unless we some kind of special talent that nobody else, we haven't bothered to tell anyone about, right? So there's a disequilibrium there. And well, Aristotle doesn't completely rule it out, right? Here's the catch though. If you're going to be friends with someone who's far superior to you, it means that what you give them is going to be much larger than what they give you, because what they're giving you is the presence of their elevated status. So you're going to have to find some big compensation in the exchange to make up for what they're giving you, right? And what they're doing is a kind of come down for them. And we typically don't talk about this kind of thing, or if we do, we always talk about in context of like, you know, the socioeconomics of America. But I mean, this is a phenomena that's kind of built into human nature, and you see it in every society on the globe, because there's no avoiding some degree of hierarchy in society unless you have true communism. And of course, then you've got the Communist Party that's always superior to everybody else. So it's immediate to see why equals more easy for them to get along, right? And of course, they're going to relate to one another. Envy and jealousy are obviously a big issue. And on the other hand, like the little person is going to flatter the elite person. And of course, that's not really friendship either. In fact, Aristotle sees flattery as a form of being disingenuous, of kind of lying to someone. You're blowing smoke up their rear end, as we would say. Okay. So like-mindedness, and the more of these we have, the more we move to complete friendship. So then with complete friendship, for example, we concern ourselves for the other person as an end in themselves, which means we care about them for who they are, for who they are. In the other forms of exchange, it turns out we don't care about the other person for who they are. We just care about what they can give you or what they can give us. What do I have here? Okay. Let's read it. I think that's the best thing to do right now. All right. Could someone start reading from chapter 3? Have a volunteer who could read for us? Shall I just pick someone?
Can you hear me loud and clear?
I can hear you great.
These things differ in form from one another, so therefore do both the kinds of differently love and the friendships that result. The forms of friendship then are three, equal in number to the things that are lovable.
Okay, so the forms of friendship are three. There are three kinds of friendship, equal in number to the things that are lovable. Now, if you look back here, what are the three things that are lovable? And I think someone actually mentioned it earlier. The three things that are lovable are the good, the pleasant, that's pleasure, and the useful, right? So these are three goods, and these turn out to be the three things that are exchanged. So in complete friendship, the good is going to be exchanged. In friendship based on pleasure, pleasure is going to be exchanged. And in friendship based on utility, things that are useful are going to be exchanged, right? And let's clarify, what does Aristotle mean by utility or useful? Aristotle has a specific word in Greek that he uses, and things that are useful are things that satisfy our basic needs, right? Like the basic needs that help us get by on a daily basis, like favors, like cash, like particularly friendship based on utility is one going to be largely defined by exchange of material goods. And it could be, for example, like a business relationship. And if you think about it, in a business relationship, you're not concerned primarily with the well-being of the other person, except insofar as they're giving you what you want, right? As long as you're getting what you want, you're not thinking about I mean, you don't want to hurt their feelings, but you're not particularly concerned with their feelings. Okay. So the three forms of friendship.
Can I just say
Yeah.
like ever since you started talking about friendship, I'm agreeing with every single thing you're saying, especially that last part. I don't care about feelings when I'm like expressing myself. So stuff like that drains me, as I mentioned in the comments. Like I don't get anything out of it. So this is why I took the class, like to really understand it. Do you get where I'm coming from? And I like that you're breaking it down because I'm really trying to understand it. At least for
So
friendship.
what's the thing that drains you?
I find that I'm the giver and I don't receive anything back. When I say giver, it could be anything from advice, kindness, anything. But I feel like getting it back is never the same. Or maybe, like you mentioned earlier, different levels or not in the same category.
Well, yeah.
Can I
So
interject really quick?
Pardon?
Can I interject?
Yeah,
I want,
let me just clarify this. So, what you can be getting from a relationship could be any number of things, and sometimes they're very subtle. So, like, I mean, you say you're the giver. For Aristotle, if you're only giving and not receiving anything, there's no reason to be in the relationship. On the other hand, if it makes you feel good to give advice, then you're getting something from giving the advice, right? Like, even if it's, I don't know, maybe you don't even care about helping the person to the nth degree. Maybe you just like talking to people or whatever it happens to be. So, Aristotle has answers for these things.
but Professor,
Yes.
isn't it, because I've always been told, and I'm starting to understand myself, that just because I give and I'm available, I should not expect the same from my friends. Just because I do it doesn't mean that I should expect them to do it to me as well. Or to do
Yeah,
it
I
for me.
mean, this is implicit.
If I have a friend,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
like if you're my friend, I go above and beyond for you. I shouldn't expect you to go above and beyond for me.
well, I mean, they're only going to go above and beyond for you if that's in them. And of course, you never know what's in another person until you find out, right? So there's more to be said about this. Why don't you hold that thought? Because Aristotle says something really, really important. I mean, let's put it this way. We have lots of friends. We don't have one friend. I mean, there's a satisfaction in being able to depend on one person and having like, I mean, what do you discover as an adult? There is no magic bullet. There is no one person who satisfies all your expectations about relationships, whether they're marriage relationships or whether they're BFF type relationships. There's just no one person, because those are your needs. And there's no reason kind of cosmically that all your needs are going to be met by one person, and that they're like made for you. Like, it just, we all know it as you grow up, and you discover that like cosmic love is something you read about in books rather in dramas like Romeo and Juliet or something, rather than in the real world. I mean, each person has the thing that they have to offer you, and they don't have everything. So, I mean, my own personal experience, because it's hard not to teach this part without talking about personal experience. You depend on different people for different things. Like, this person I can get this from, or that person I can get that from, in terms of my needs and just my desires, what have you. But unfortunately, there's not that magic bullet person that has it all.
Your
Right?
soulmate, no?
Yeah, so that's what we're talking about. That's maybe the word, that expression everybody knows, the soulmate. It's something we'll talk about when we look at the symposium. But we're going to come back to this issue. Let's keep reading here and get through these three types of friendship.
In accord with each is a reciprocal love that does not go unnoticed. And those who love each other wish for the good things for each other in that respect in which they love each other.
Okay, so notice he says in each there's a reciprocal love, meaning it goes both ways, and it's not unnoticed, right? People could be exchanging back and forth in a two-way street, but one person may not pay attention to the little things you do. So like, I guess Cynthia, she does a little thing where she does something that she thinks the other person's going to recognize and appreciate. And the other person, they don't recognize it, and therefore they don't appreciate it. And if it were done to her, she'd recognize it and appreciate it. But the other person, they don't even think about it. Right? They just don't pay attention to that stuff, whatever it happens to be. Right? I tell my wife sometimes, like, I just say, I appreciate the gesture, honey, but this is not the thing that I need from you at this moment. Something like that. And she thinks that what she's offering is the thing that I really need. Right? And I'm like, well, it's very nice, and it shows goodwill, but it's not actually the thing. And so I'm telling her, in a sense, like, I don't recognize what she's offering as the thing that I really need at that moment. And that's always like, you don't like having to say those kind of things. But in the real world, you end up spend enough time with people, you say them. Okay, so notice the exchange cannot go unnoticed. So there's this whole specter now introduced of appearance and reality. People don't see things the same way. They don't perceive things the same way. What you think you're offering from your point of view is maybe not how they see it as they're receiving. Maybe their whole perception of the relationship, what you think you're getting and giving from their point of view, is different from your point of view. And you can see all the hijinks that then ensues. Let's take the obvious example. The dude just wants to get laid, right? And the girl wants to be in love with the guy. And he's saying all the right things, but he doesn't really mean them, because he just wants to get her in bed, right? She has a total misapprehension about what she's doing. And he's misrepresenting what he's really offering. He's kind of pretending to offer love, but he's not really offering love. He's pretending to offer a complete friendship, you could call it, but he's really just interested in friendship based on pleasure, something like that. Let's keep going here.
Those who love each other on account of utility, then do not love each other in themselves.
Okay, really important. People who love each other based on utility don't actually love each other. What are they really in love with if it's not each other?
What they can get.
Yes, very good. It's what they get that they care about. It's not each other. So this he calls a form of friendship. And if you think about it, this is a really broad type of friendship, utility, and it turns out to be the lowest. In fact, initially he put the life of pleasure, of bodily pleasure last and contemplation at the top. Now pleasure is superior to utility. And people who love on account of utility, that's the lowest form of friendship. Can you think of some examples? Friendship, quote unquote, based on utility?
Being in the relationship because the girl has money.
Okay, perfect example. The anybody going after somebody's money, right?
Or fame.
Yeah, that's interesting. Fame, that could be issues of pleasure though too. That's a little tricky, but sure. You don't care about them. First of all, we're not talking about necessarily an intimate relationship, right? When I go to Starbucks and engage with the barista at Starbucks, that's a relationship of utility. It's a relationship just in the sense that I'm engaged with them. It's not like a relationship, but I give them money and they give me coffee, right? There's an exchange. So you think about like any business type relationship, any commercial type of relationship, a job is a relationship that at least starts out based on utility, right? Why do you work for your boss? You don't work for him because he's a nice guy or because you love him. You work for him because paycheck come in mail, right? I mean, very simple. And you put up with whoever your boss is because paycheck comes, or I should say, hopefully direct deposit. Um, so, you know, Immanuel Kant, the philosopher and moral thinker, said something really powerful. He said, our goal in life should be to treat people not merely as means, but also as ends in themselves. I'll say it again. The goal in our life with our relationships should be to treat people not merely as means, but also as ends in themselves. To treat someone as a means, you're treating them how?
For what you can get out of it.
Yes, when they're a means, they are just an instrument for you to get what you want, which means you don't care about the instrument, you care about the thing that it gets you, right? Friendships of utility are ones where you use people, and it could be in an open way, like I use the barista to get me the coffee, and they get my money, or it could be more nefarious where people are used and they don't fully realize it, that they're being used. But there are many relationships of utility. I mean, your boss doesn't think you work there because you like him. Well, some of them may, right? They know it's because you get paid, right? Because you want the money. Okay. So the important thing is in friendships of utility, you actually don't care about the other person. And by don't care, I mean you're just not concerned with them. So long as they're providing the good that you want, that's all you care about. You don't care about what they're like necessarily. You don't care about the quality of their character. As long as they're not harming you, as long as they're maintaining the exchange, then it's all good. And so it could be rather impersonal, right? Shall we keep going? You there, Tashana?
Oh, yes, I was on mute. But only insofar as they come to have something good from the other. Similar to is the case of those who love on account of pleasure. For people are fond of those who are witty, not because they are of certain sort, but because they are pleasant to them. Therefore, those who love on account of utility feel affection for the sake of their own good, just as those who love on account of pleasure feel affection for
Oh, oh, yep, there we go.
feel
With it.
feel affection for the sake of their own pleasure.
Okay, so notice what you've discovered here. People who are in relationships for utility and for pleasure, they feel affection for the benefit that they get, and they're not concerned with the other person. In complete friendship, the concern is going to be for the other person and the character, the nature of the other person. And they're going to care about them as an end rather than just a means. They're going to care about them for their own sake. You know, honey, I love you for you, not for your money, right? I mean, how many silly like sitcoms you see like please like that. So you see an interesting problem with friendship based on pleasure. The pleasure is not about the other person. The pleasure is about the pleasure you take from the person. What's the problem with what is it called? Friends with benefits? That lovely euphemism. What's the problem with friends with benefits? Why is it that for most people it is an unsatisfying state of affairs?
Because you can get
Feelings get
attached and you
involved.
really don't know what you are.
Well, if you get attached, then it sounds like you don't want friends with benefits anymore.
Well, that's what
Which of
happens. I
course,
feel like once you start, like you get close to some person. I don't know.
which of course is natural. So what about those cool customers? I don't think there's really that many who can sustain this for that long. Those cool customers who think they can compartmentalize and say, well, I'm going to call you up at 12 for the phone call and we're going to get together. We're going to sleep together, but then we're not going to have any feelings for each other. We're going to go off and do our own thing and we're not going to get involved. We're just going to have benefits and we're not going to be in a relationship. We're not going to be committed. What's the problem with that state of affairs? Why is it almost for the normal person, it's almost impossible to like maintain a relationship like that? Why is it so hard?
Because one or the other will catch feelings and would want more.
Yeah, and you would kind of suppose you hope they would have feelings rather than not have feelings, which means they don't just want the other person physically, which means they actually like the person.
Mhm.
So think about the problem. Friends with benefits is a quintessential example of friendship based on pleasure. Why is the other person sleeping with you in friends with benefits and friends based on pleasure?
Because they have some form of attraction towards that person. There's something about that person that they like.
Up to a point. Let's just with what Aristotle says here. What is that person getting?
Utility?
Well, no, it's pleasure.
Pleasure.
Do they care about the other person?
No.
No.
No. So if we take the obviously in the real world, it doesn't, most of the time, if you're not like a sociopath, it doesn't hold up because people have feelings in the real world. But if we just think about it, coldly, the problem of the relationship is, I take pleasure from your body, but I want the pleasure from your body, but I don't want you.
No commitment.
Well, to say a commitment is a little more. It's to say, I really don't want you. It's not about you. despite the fact that we're, you know, next to one another intimately, I still don't want you emotionally, in terms of a commitment, right? And that, I mean, that is like, you can see why that relationship's problematic, because it's an insult to your own dignity.
Yep.
You're giving away the most intimate part, well, one of the most intimate parts of you, and the person does not want you in return, right? I mean, it's a kind of, dare I say, it's even a kind of humiliation, right?
It is.
Because once the person has obtained that type of proximity to you, and you're giving them that thing that you don't give to 99.99% of other people, and yet they don't want anything else other than the pleasure they can take from your body, like it's a kind of an insult. And I think it's exactly why the average person, you know, people vary, right? And people have different tolerance levels for different types of relationships, but most people wouldn't feel comfortable for the long term being in a relationship. So that's why people start having feelings, because they, you know, and I think, you know, most people I think are probably rather foolish to think that they can succeed in that kind of situation, or that it, you know, I don't like the word health, but you know, maintaining, you know, engaging in relationships that maintain your own dignity are absolutely crucial. I mean, one thing you have to offer the world is, you know, your own sense of self-worth. And when you don't have a sense of self-worth, people don't respect you. So when you give it up in various ways, like you're hurting yourself in multiple ways. Why don't we keep going here?
He who is loved in each case is not loved for himself, but only insofar as he is useful or pleasant. And these then are friendships incidentally, for it is not for being what he is that the person loved is loved, but only insofar as he provides in the one case something good or in the other pleasure.
So there, Aristotle makes it really clear. You are not being loved for who you are. You're just being loved for what you offer, right? And that's the problem.
These sorts of friendships then are easily dissolved when the people involved do not remain the same as they were. For if they are no longer pleasant or useful, those who love them will cease to do so. And what is useful does not remain constant, but is different and different times. When that
Okay, let's stop there. What is Aristotle saying here? He's talking about relationships dissolving, and he's talking about things changing, particularly in terms of friendships based on utility and pleasure. Do friendships based on utility and pleasure for Aristotle last a long time?
No,
No. And the question is, why not?
because once you're not beneficial to the person anymore, there's no use for you.
Exactly. Once the exchange breaks down, the relationship ends. Why would you cease to be beneficial to the other person? That's an important question. Why would someone cease to be beneficial for you? Because what?
Because they have a need that you don't have.
Not quite, because the needs don't have to be exactly the same. And in these relationships, you notice that in complete friendship, the need or the desire, the motive for the relationship is identical. But in these two, they can be all mixed up. I can be in it for utility and you can be in it for pleasure. Imagine it's hard to imagine, but I'm a prostitute. I want the cash. That's utility. But you want the pleasure. So you give me the cash and you get the pleasure, right? So actually you can mix and match utility and pleasure pretty easily. Why doesn't the other person benefit me more at some point? Do I need what they're offering anymore?
No, maybe they moved on and
No, no,
no longer
no.
need that.
Yeah. So
Temporary.
either they gave me what I needed and it was enough and I'm just done with it, or my needs change. Because what happens in life? Our needs change all the time, right? So you've got to keep in mind that these relationships, we're not necessarily talking about the most serious relationships here. We could be, but because they involve utility and pleasure, obviously. And complete seems to involve actually all three: utility, pleasure, and whatever that you exchange in complete relationships. But the point is, let's put it this way: when I go to the Starbucks, once I pay for my coffee and barista gives me the coffee, I don't need them anymore. I don't stay around and keep talking to them. It would be silly for me if I only need the one coffee. I'm done. Bye bye. You know, I'll come back in a week or whatever it is, right? So there's all kinds of exchanges where there's like a one shot deal where after that there's just nothing else to be done, and so therefore the relationship dissolves. We're not talking about a serious relationship here necessarily. Could be, but it doesn't have to be. Okay, so that's really crucial. And here's the other kicker, that in things in terms of utility and pleasure, they change all the time. We'll see this. Let's see this on the next page. You want to keep going, Deshauna?
Yes, I'll finish up. Um, For if they are no longer pleasant or useful, those who love them will cease to do so. And what is useful does not remain constant, but is different at different times. When that on the basis of which they were friends is nullified, then so too the friendship is dissolved. Since the friendship exists with a view to the thing in question, this sort of friendship seemed to arise especially among the old, for those of such an age pursue not what is pleasant, but what is beneficial to them, as well as among all those who in their prime or the young who pursue what is adventurous. And such people do not frequently live with each other either, for sometimes they are not even pleasant to each other. They therefore have no additional need of this sort of association if they supply no benefit to the other, for they are pleasant to each other only insofar as they foster hopes of obtaining something good from the other. It is also among these sorts of friendships that people place the kind of connect with foreigners.
Okay, so what is he saying? Your needs change, and when your
They,
needs change, your relationships change.
yes,
And he brings up a bigger spectrum of not just like changing in the moment, but that we exist within stages of life. There's a stage of youth. There's a stage of kind of like peak maturity, kind of early middle age, 30s, 40s, something like that. And then there's old age. And at those three different stages, he's kind of marked out that there are different needs we have at each stage. And therefore, we associate with different people because different types of people are providing the things we need. And if you think about the transformation of your own relationships, you see that that's tremendously at play. I mean, obviously, there's an issue of you can only be friends with the people you're actually around, right? And all of our friendships are and our love relationships, they're limited by who we actually can have access to and happen to get, happen to get to know. Like in Juno Diaz, where he's stuck with the guys on his street. They're his friends because they're the ones on his street. But then your needs in life change. There's the classic one of, people who get married and have kids, and then they're living a very different life than they were 5 years earlier when they were going out and partying and having a good time and, being reckless and silly. And all of a sudden they're hanging out with people who are raising kids as well, and they're not hanging out with the people who are out partying. Um, and things like that. You want to keep going, Tashana?
But the friendship of the young seems to be based on pleasure, for they live according to passion and most of all pursue what is pleasant to them at, at hand. But
Okay,
since
okay. So this is one of the big problems of relationships based on pleasure. And here he seems to be talking about physical pleasure. Um, what's the problem with being connected with people based on physical pleasure? And he points that this is a problem for the young.
It's gonna change sometime. You're not gonna feel the same thing.
How much is it going to change?
Mm,
A little bit?
no, a lot.
Yeah, I think a lot and all the time,
Mhm.
right? And he's saying what they find pleasant is the thing that is at hand. It's like who's the attractive one? The one who's in front of them that they can, I don't know, make out with at the party, right? And then tomorrow there's another one and so on and so forth. So it's like it's a moving target, right? And one of the problems for Aristotle is that a condition of happiness needs to be stable. You can see for practical reasons why that would be. If things are fluctuating in your life constantly, so it's hard to be happy, hard to perform virtuously, and even having a feeling of contentment, right? So that applies to relationships as well. If relationships are fluctuating, there's no stability there. There's no foundation to your life, right? And the problem with pleasure or solely pleasure is think about the sexual impulse. It's like uh, you know uh, what's attractive is the thing that it's in front of you at the moment. The sexual impulse is indiscriminate. This is a relationship built on passions. It's built on impulses, and impulses, they're constantly being generated by your soul, your body, and they're kind of indiscriminate, right? And while it may be enjoyable in one way, it's not the pathway to kind of building the foundation of your life, right? So he's making a really keen observation here. He's not a Christian, right? Aristotle is not condemning pleasure because like the body is sinful. There is absolutely nothing like that in Aristotle. There is no Christianity in 4th century Greece. Like obviously there ain't no Jesus yet. Um, and even the ideas of like the sinfulness of the body start to emerge later in Christian thinking. So he doesn't denigrate sex or anything like that. He just puts it in its place, right? It's interesting. You want to keep going?
hence the young swiftly become friends and cease being so. The friendship changes together with what they find pleasant, and change in the sort of pleasure is swift. The young are given to erotic love as well, for the greater part of erotic love is bound up with passion and is based on pleasure, which is why they love and swiftly cease loving, often changing in the course of the same day. But the young do wish to pass their days together and live together, for in this way they attain what friendship for them involves.
So you notice that Aristotle, by introducing this issue of change of human beings and what they need or want, starts to introduce a very real world issue here that is, one of the central problems of human relationships. Things change, right? Which means your commitments with a lot of people are never permanent because you already know once you get older, you realize things are going to change. So you realize you're more circumspect in the way you treat someone because you're not going to be engaged in some type of exchange for an extended period of time. So think about it. Friendship based on pleasure, he's just acknowledged, is friendship based on that's guided by your passions and your impulses. Can being guided by your passions or your impulses contribute to your happiness for Aristotle? What do you think?
Yes, That's puppy love.
Yeah, that's partly what we're talking about. Absolutely. But in the big picture, can being guided by your passions be the way to happiness for Aristotle? Guided exclusively by your passions.
Yes.
Say no.
Yeah, for Aristotle, I'd say no. So let's be clear. We have this we prize our emotions, and when we think of love, we think of emotion. But Aristotle is thinking slightly differently here. He's thinking of impulses. When we use the word passions or emotions, think impulses or even instincts, right? These instincts are just like what other animals have, right? Other animals have the desire for food, sex, sleep, so on. It's built into them, right? It's not something that you consider. It's not something that you reflect on. You just have the impulse. And Aristotle says virtuous activity is a product of our reasoning, practical reason, intellectual reason, so on. So if you're simply being driven by your impulses, there's no way you're going to be happy. And in particular, the problem with your impulses is that they don't see their own consequences. The classic expression is the passions are blind. They want what they want, but they're blind to the consequences. Like you go to a party, you get drunk. What does the alcohol do? It liberates your impulses and it short circuits your rational judgment. When he says reasoning, he doesn't mean like being a computer or being like Spock on Star Trek. What he just means is using your judgment, at least as it comes to action. And for example, when you're drunk, what alcohol does is it impairs your judgment. Like everybody knows that one way or the other. And of course, it unleashes your impulses. And the problem with your impulses is that they're not able to see their own consequences. They just want what they want. You know, oh, I want to drink that whole case of beer, says my impulse or someone's impulse. And then you wake up the next day having drunken some ridiculous amount and you go, that was a really stupid idea. I mean, drinking is fun in moderation. It's cool, but getting so shit-faced you like blackout, like you realize that's just stupid. And you don't have to have your parent say it or a professor say it. You learn by experiencing it. You just go, just there's nothing satisfying about it, right? Because getting, blacking out is very different than having a few drinks and enjoying yourself, right? We're not discounting the anyway. So the problem with impulses is that they're just random and they fluctuate and you have no control over them, or at least there's no control until reason kind of adjudicates your passions and says this one is okay to act on and this one is not such a good idea. And of course, that's what we do every day. We have impulses for this and that, and we try to make the best judgment. And sometimes we just have to, we learn through reward and punishment. And if we don't figure it out by making a good choice, we do the wrong thing, and then we see the negative consequences and we realize we don't want to do it again, right? So we're not talking about like a rules-based system here where like you have to be a Puritan. What we're talking about is you realize for yourself that in the big picture of your own happiness, giving into the impulse doesn't contribute to it. Where did we finish up? Are we at the top of page 168? Yes. You want to keep going, Tashana?
But complete.
Complete friendship. Yes. Complete friendship. What the hell is complete friendship? Nobody seems to know. We've got to figure this out.
But complete friendship is the friendship of those who are good and alike in the point of virtue. For such people wish in similar fashion for the good things for each other insofar as they are good. And they are good in themselves.
In themselves.
But those who wish for the but those who wish for the good things for their friends, for their friend's sake are friends most of all, since they are disposed in this way in themselves and not incidentally.
Okay, great. So he talks about complete friendship is friendship of people who are good. What do you think he means by the word good here?
People who are beneficial to each other, who help each other.
I think it's even a little more than that. I agree with what you're saying. Absolutely. What does he mean by good? He says friendship of those who are good. Remember the three things that are lovable, that are the basis of exchange: the useful, the pleasant, and the good. What kind of people engage in complete friendship? People who are what?
Similar, alike.
They're going, well, yes, you've just solved one answer. They're going to be similar and alike and more equal because they're alike, because they're both good. What do we mean by good here? Don't fry your brains on this one, folks. He's talking, I think here he's talking about people of good character, people who we'd call good, like morally virtuous, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's important. In relationships based on utility or pleasure, does it matter what kind of character you have?
No.
No, because that's not the thing involved in the exchange. Here, you only, what's his premise? You care about the other person precisely because they're good. And precisely because they're good, I hate to put it this way, but their goodness or their decency offers you something. It's beneficial to you, right? And you care about them for their own sake in complete friendship, in a way in which you do not in the other two forms. Aristotle ultimately is going to go on to say that complete friendship is true friendship. Complete friendship is the only form of real friendship. And he also has made an implicit claim that we might not all agree with, that contemporary commentators dispute. What has he just said? If complete friendship is the only form of true friendship, and you are or have to be good to engage in it, what does this say about people who are not good?
They don't have complete friendships.
Yeah, Aristotle is making the implicit claim, and he says it later on. He calls them people who are base, people lacking in virtue, people who are bad, one kind or another. He doesn't specify, right? It's just kind of, things are open. But people of bad character for Aristotle cannot be complete friends, right? Because it's precisely because you're good that the other person cares about you for your own sake. If you're bad, it's hard for the other person to care about you for your own sake because your sake, for lack of a better word, is not so good. Now, in book 9, he complicates this a little bit. Why? Because nobody's perfect. And what's part of the function of these relationships? Are these relationships, particularly complete friendship, are they there to make us better or worse?
Better.
Is complete friendship going to make us better or worse as a human being?
Better.
Better.
Yes. So in the real world, when he says good people are complete friends, well, number one, nobody's perfect. So everyone's in the process of trying to be a better human being, ostensibly, right? So therefore, we're engaged in this relationship, mutually trying to kind of help each other up the mountain of life, or however metaphor you want to think of it, trying to make ourselves better people. And in complete friendship, it's the one relationship where we're actually involved in trying to make each other better. what connection does this have to human happiness as Aristotle understands it? Which is the relationship that's going to contribute to human happiness?
The intellectual one.
Complete friendship.
Yeah, there may be an intellectual component to complete friendship that we'll see later on. And actually you're on the right path. But it's very clear that it's only complete friendship that's really going to provide us happiness because it involves virtue. It involves two people who are virtuous and, well, we still don't know what they exchange. Has anyone figured it out yet? In the other relationships, we get things that are beneficial to us, but we don't get things that directly contribute to our virtue. They may make virtue possible, but they don't actually contribute to our virtue. Let's keep going. We got to figure out what's exchanged in complete friendship. These people are more alike. They're good. How long is this relationship going to last?
Each person involved is good simply and for the friend, since good people are good simply and beneficial to one another. So two are they pleasant, for the good are both pleasant, simple and pleasant to one another. A complicated sentence. To each person his own actions, and those like them accord with his pleasure, and the actions of those who are good are the same or similar. It is with good reason that this.
Okay, so I think we may have, I'm sorry, because I've messed, kind of broken things up. It says this friendship can, let's go back to right here. It's about line 12. Their friendship continues then while they are good, and virtue is a stable thing. So first of all, to be good is to be virtuous. And it turns out being good or virtuous is something stable. What do we mean by something stable? It doesn't what?
It doesn't change.
Yes, it doesn't change. What's the problem with the other relationships? Things change.
And they're short-lived.
And because things change, they're short-lived. So here he's making an argument that what you're after in relationship is the other person. You're concerned with them. That's the thing you desire. And you desire them because they have good character. And then it turns out because they have good character or are virtuous, that their identity, because they are the good that you're after in a sense, their identity is stable. So since their identity is stable, it's likely that this relationship is going to be also the longest lasting, right? That's important. It's this stupid thing. Stop doing that. How can I make that go away? All right, good enough. All right, you want to start with the next paragraph there?
It is with good reason that this sort of friendship is stable, since it is combined in itself all those things that ought to belong to friends.
Okay, this is really interesting. He says this relationship combines in itself all those things that ought to belong to friends. It combines all those things. What do you think all those things are?
Utility, pleasure.
Yes, I think one reason why complete friendship is called complete is because it combines all three of those goods. It combines utility, it combines the pleasant, and it combines the good all in one. So if you're in this relationship, you're not just some kind of angel with a halo. You're also getting the benefits of the other elements. I mean, it's obvious. If you're married to someone and you love them, you also, and you're in complete friendship with them, you obviously also get benefits of utility and pleasure of one kind or another, right? So they're not mutually exclusive. And this relationship seems to have the whole thing, therefore complete. At least that's one understanding of complete here. Great, good. You want to keep going, Tashana?
For every friendship exists on account of a good or pleasure, either simply or for the person who loves, and in accord with the likeness involved. And in this complete friendship, all that has been spoken of it is present in the friends themselves. Since in this respect, the friends are alike, and the remaining reason for forming friendship are present as well, both the good simple and the pleasant simply, and these things are lovable most of all. So it is among these people that both loving and friendship are especially prevalent and best.
Okay, great. Nice job. So question, Aristotle opens up this chapter or this book after talking about the importance of friendship generally. He raises the question of whether opposites attract or likes attract. What do you think his answer is? What's more important, to be alike or to be different?
I think he means to be alike. He
Yeah.
said something about likeness
Yes. So
in
you notice in
themselves.
complete friendship, the people not only are most alike, but they have to be most alike. Precisely because they're both good. And what we like about them and what we care about, the thing we get is precisely that it's them, it's their character that we care about. And I think implicitly he has an idea that we can't care about. I know this sounds, some people are going to not like this idea because it sounds uncharitable. Is that we don't care about people, we can't care about people with bad character. Maybe we want to make them better, but we can't admire bad character. We can't appreciate bad character precisely because it's not it's not good. In the other relationships, your character, who you are, doesn't matter. So the two people can be radically different and still engage in those other two relationships. And of course, you see this stuff all the time in real life when you start applying these categories to the relationships you see, and you ask yourself, what is the motivation for this person to be engaged with this other person in some type of relationship? Um, and there's also another reason why being alike one another is important, because Aristotle in book 9 will raise the idea of self-love. And the idea of self-love is, number one, you love yourself the most. And number two, connected with that, you love things that are like you the most. And Aristotle referenced this very in a roundabout way in the Politics when uh, he talks about children, parents having children, and he says they leave behind a likeness of themselves, and they're attached to their children precisely because they're like them, right? Um, Ever wonder why you care about your kid, more than the kid down the street? Um, well, because they're like you the most. I mean, they're literally an extension of your body in one sense. So you feel like the obligation to care for them comes with self-love is a huge motivator to 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 meet the duties of parenthood, for example. Um, And think about it. When people spend more time together, do they become more alike or more different?
More alike.
Like,
Yeah. So think about it. This is the stable relationship that's going to last for, let's just say, a long time. So they're already a little bit alike to begin with because they're both reasonably good. And as they're with each other for a longer time, their identities are more going to kind of meld with one another. Of course, guess what the problem is? Well, we'll keep going and we'll talk about what that problem is. It's really interesting in terms of being alike one another. Your answer is that the more you're around each other, what do people in relationships do? They habituate each other. They train each other. I mean, if you're married, you know what that means. I guess if you've seen your parents, you know what that means. They train each other to do what each of them wants the other person to do,
Yep.
and so on and so forth. But there's an interesting problem with being around each other for a long time. And on one hand, you grow together, you become more similar in certain ways. But there's another factor that also creates an interesting little a pebble in the shoe, let's say. You want to keep going, Tashana?
Yet the friendships of this sort are likely to be rare, since people of this sort are few. Further,
Okay.
there
Good people are few, and you must be of good character to engage in this relationship, and therefore this relationship is rare, right? This is kind of like a pinnacle of achievement here, this relationship. And you see, Aristotle is very hierarchical. He sees things in unequal way. He's not willing to just kind of like say everybody's great and be concerned with people's self-esteem. He's kind of very frank about things here. So if this relationship is rare, you would also even think that achieving human happiness is not something that everybody does from Aristotle's perspective, given his definition of it. It's something that's challenging. You want to keep going?
further, there is also need of the passage of time and the habits formed by living together. For as the adage
Adage, the
as
saying,
it is not possible for people to know each other until they have eaten together.
eaten together, the
The proverbial salt,
proverbial salt.
nor is it possible before this occurs for them to accept each other and to be friends until each appear to each as lovable and is trusted. Those who swiftly make proofs of friendships to each other wish to be friends, but are not such unless they are also lovable and know this about each other. For a wish for friendship arises swiftly, but friendship itself does not.
Okay. How are we doing, folks? We go like 10 more minutes?
Yes, we can go.
I'm here.
Yeah, I'm here too.
Yes.
Yeah, this is very interesting. Keep going. I'm washing dishes, but I'm listening.
I'm still willing.
Yeah, let's keep going. It's interesting.
All right. So we're going to start with the last line. Aristotle, he says so much and he doesn't explain it, but this last line is really important. For a wish for friendship arises swiftly, but friendship itself does not. A wish for friendship arises swiftly or quickly, but let's just say real friendship does not materialize quickly. What's the problem here for human beings? I think he's saying this about all of us. What's the problem here?
Getting to know each other.
Okay.
Like you have to, like he was saying about, eating together, like getting to know each other.
Absolutely. So the proverbial salt has to do with eating with one another, because that's just a common habit by which people begin to become familiar with one another, right? And so this has to do with knowledge of the other person, and somehow love or friendship. The word philia can be translated as love. And if you're talking about complete friendship, you're talking about something that's more like love, not necessarily sexual desire, but some kind of real comradeship, some real intimacy. And based on, principles, not just like mushy feelings that come and go, right? So what's the expression? To know someone is to love them. To know someone is to love them, right? So that's kind of what he's getting at here. So a wish for friendship arises swiftly, but friendship itself does not. Let's take the second part. Why does it take a long time for friendship to materialize? Real friends.
Can I answer that?
Yes, you may.
Because I think because you, like you said, you do have to get to know the person. You have to know their goods, their bads, their likes, their needs, their want. Like all of the detailed things take time, and that's the problem with friendships and relationships nowadays. We wish for it so fast, and that comes fast, but then
Well,
when
but look what Aristotle's saying. It's not about our times. It's about always times, right? That's the way it is. So let's flip it around. Why do friendships take time? Let's put it the other way. Yes, you need to get to know them. Let's flip it around, because at the beginning, you don't know them from a hole in the wall.
yeah,
You don't know anything about them. And so, but that moment we see them, I don't know if it's boy, girl, or romantic relationship, boy, girl, girl, whatever, who cares? You love someone, that's great. It's kind of simple. So if you're willing to concern, yourself with them. So what's the problem? We want it now. It's like, when do we want it? We want it now, right? We want, and let's talk, it's not sex. We're talking about some kind of real intimacy here. The problem is you cannot have friendship now. It doesn't work that way. Friendship is only achieved through getting to know someone, because you don't know who you're friends with until you know them. And if you don't know them, you can't really be friends with them, because this friendship involves being friends with them because of who they are, and you don't know who they are. So, I mean, what's one problem with our wish for friendship rising faster than the reality? We project all our desires, all our hopes onto the other person, or onto the possibility of the relationship. But we have no clue if what we've projected on them is actually them, right? And I suppose that's particularly true in, when you're young and falling in love, and you go, oh my God, this person's amazing. And then at the end of it, when you break up, you go, oh my God, that person is nothing like me. I can't believe I ever thought that we would, be in a relationship or something like that. Because of course it wasn't going to work or something. So, I mean, Aristotle points out like a perennial problem of relationships, that we need it now, or we feel we need it now, but we can't get it immediately. It takes time. You have to know who they really are. And so to go back here, he says, what makes friends is habits formed by living together. Habits formed by living together. So actually, he raises two really interesting things. He talks about habits, and he talks about implicitly knowledge of the other person, right? So two things happen when you live together for a long time, or you're around each other on a regular basis, which is, number one, you're doing the same things with each other, and you're growing together, and you're habituating yourself to the same routine, right? And then on the other hand, you're just learning about who the other person is and what they're like. And those things are kind of two separate things. And here's the thing, the habits that develop make you more alike. Somebody talked about people repeat each other's phrases and body language and whatnot. Maybe the interest kind of converges. Okay, Cynthia, I'll make sure to get you down for attendance. And we're going to wrap up in just a second. But the other thing is, so habits make you more alike. But the more you learn about someone, which is, knowing someone is loving them is really knowing them, because how can you love someone if you don't know what you're loving, right? Like, that's a really important observation Aristotle is suggesting here. You can't love what you don't know you're loving, because it's just feelings that are pouring out of you, right? That don't understand the object of their desire. This doesn't sound like sounds like a recipe for disaster, right? But so habits make you more alike. But what happens the more you know about someone?
You know about their skeleton in their closet.
Yeah, so that's one thing. You might also start learning about how the two of you are really different in certain ways, right? I mean, relationships, particularly romantic relationships, start with a like a strong sense of harmony and like everything's in sync. But what happens with the time that's spent? It's not just that you're talking, it's that you're acting out in different situations, and different situations bring out different facets of a person. And those different situations are going to go, holy smokes, this person really is different in this way. And I never saw it before because I didn't get a chance to see it. Think about the difference between I see that person on Friday night when we date versus I see that person every morning when I wake up and we brush our teeth, something like that. So you see things when you're in, a live-in or in marriage that you would never see when you're just dating. And of course, dating is just like Facebook. People craft the best image of themselves, right? And then, you're around them when they're brushing their teeth, and you're like, this isn't for me, or something like that. You realize where you really stand. So it's interesting. Knowledge is also a form of love, but you also discover, the more you know about them, you discover more clearly the ways in which they're different. So knowledge of the other person is a kind of funny double-edged sword here. Let's just kind of wrap up complete friendship here. Tashana, could you just read a little bit of chapter 4 and we'll call it a night?
This friendship then is complete in regard to both time and the remaining considerations, namely the good and pleasure. And in every respect, each friend comes to possess from the other the same or similar things, which is just what ought to be in the case with friends. Friendship
Okay,
based.
1 second. So he gives a definition of complete here. We're talking about complete friendship. What makes it? He says it's complete in regard to what?
Similarities, things that you can get from each other, equal exchange. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, but that's not the central part that he mentions. Because that's after the semicolon where he starts talking about their likeness to one another. Complete means what? In regard to
being whole.
Ultimately, it does have to do with that, yes. He says in regard to time, and then he says, and the remaining considerations. What the hell is he talking about? The remaining considerations. In the parentheses, namely the brackets, namely the good and pleasure. So what makes this relationship complete?
The good and pleasure?
Yeah, so number one, that it has all the components of the other types of friendship. And we've said that earlier. So complete means number one, having all, it's like all three forms of friendship in one. But what is the time issue? What makes it complete? How long does this relationship last? What's the duration of it?
A long time.
Yeah, it lasts a long time, and presumably a lifetime. I mean, if good character is stable and you want to be with a person because they're good character, it sounds like it would be a lifetime. And so you think about a complete life. A complete life is basically a lifetime. So you see a kind of connection between a complete life and complete friendship here. All right, you want to keep going, Tashana?
Friendship based on what is pleasant bears a resemblance to this one, for in fact the good are pleasant to one another as well. Similar to in the case of friendship based on utility, for the good are also useful to one another. But among those who seek pleasure or utility, friendships endure, especially whenever each attains the same thing from the other. For example, pleasure, and not only this, but whatever it comes from, the same type, as in, for example, those who are in witty, and not as in the case of lover and beloved. for lover and beloved are not pleased by the same things. Rather, the lover is pleased by seeing the beloved by being attended to by his lover. And sometimes when the bloom of youth fades, so too the friendship fades. Since for the lover the sight of the other is not pleasant, and for the beloved the attention of the lover is no more. Many in the turn do remain friends. However, whenever as a result of their living together, they feel affection for their characters. If they are of the same character, but in the case of lovers, whom mutual exchange is not for pleasure but utility, they are the remain friends to the lesser degree, and those who are friends on account of utility dissolve the friendship and the same time as the advantages cease. For they were friends not to each other, but to the profit involved.
Okay, great. Very nice job to Shauna. Just two quick points here. Number one, Aristotle here talks about a very particular type of erotic relationship between a lover and a beloved. And the lover is the one who shows the interest, and the beloved is the one who receives it. And this is a kind of, it's not quite a friendship necessarily. It's certainly not necessarily complete friendship. And it's going to be a type of relationship that we're going to see on display in Plato's Symposium. And they're going to talk about this, and it's going to be discussed in the introduction to the text, this relationship of lover and beloved. And it's one essentially where the lover chases the beloved, the object of their desire. And it's a different, Aristotle's friendship is about a certain type of relation with the other person. It's not just about feelings. However, this relationship of lover to beloved that we'll see in Plato is about kind of desire for the other person. It's about emotion, something that I think you all will recognize. I want to just clarify, what is the good that's exchanged in complete friendship? It's very clear in the other ones. What do they do for each other? What do they provide for each other? And I'm not saying Aristotle makes it so clear, but they must be providing something. What is it? If there's no exchange of goods, if there are no goods, there's no relationship. Any thoughts? Are we there? This is the last question for the night.
Repeat the question again, Professor.
What is the good? All relationships in Aristotle are based on exchange. And I think actually that's just true in life. Complete friendship. It's the highest form of friendship. It's true friendship for Aristotle. It's real friendship. What do they exchange?
And you're not talking about the three, what do you call it? You're not talking about the three things that was discussed
Okay,
earlier.
what are the three things? The useful, the pleasant, and the good. What does it mean to exchange? And I think here he's talking about the morally good. Yeah.
It has to be something long lasting, something intellectual. Like, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Would
So
it be time? Spending time with each other? Would it be time? Like,
well, not just time. I mean, I can spend a lousy time with people. That's not hard.
Companionship, trust, willingness to be there if called on.
Okay, we're getting there. What kind of things does a person of good character do in general?
compromise.
Too specific. In general, what kind of deeds does a good person do? A person of good character.
No respect.
Could be.
Honor.
More generally, I'm looking for a general. You're gonna get mad at me for when I
They
say.
give without expecting anything in return.
Okay, they do. They do that absolutely in this relationship. Whereas the other one, you only give because you expect something in return. When I give those $3 to the barista, I expect my coffee in return. If not, something's wrong. Right?
Yeah.
What is it they give? In general. Okay, Diego says good things. Can we be more specific?
A service. No.
We're getting close. You're all gonna get mad at me when I say it.
I feel
Love. I don't know. French.
Okay.
Genuine love.
Yeah, I mean, friendship, that begs the question of what we're talking about. I mean, Aristotle has given some meat to the bone about what he means by friendship. Well, genuine friendship, what does it consist of? What is the good exchange? There's something's okay.
Happiness with one another.
It's gonna have something to do with happiness. Thank you. Very good. Let's just say virtuous deeds to one another.
That's crazy.
It could be deeds of moral virtue, and it could be deeds of intellectual virtue. But since they're people of good character, that's synonymous with being virtuous. So what they give each other is they perform good deeds. And of course, what is the definition of happiness? It's living virtuously. So when I perform a good deed for my complete friend, I'm also I'm acting out the very definition of happiness. So doing a good deed for my friend, engaging, for example, in moral virtue, is itself good for me as much as it's good for them because it contributes to my happiness and it contributes to their well-being.
Like simple things that you do. I couldn't name one of them. I'm sorry, I'm mumbling, I'm tired.
Well, I mean, we could go through the various lists of virtues, right? That Aristotle has given that we really don't have time to look at in detail, right? But in general, our virtuous deeds are going, for example, they're going to make us better people. And by making us better people, we're going to be increasingly contributing to our own happiness. I'll give you one example. He talks about the virtue of friendliness, and he talks about the virtue of truthfulness, and they're interconnected. And he talks about how it's a virtue to be truthful with your friend, as opposed to flattering them and kind of fudging them. So you're acting virtuously toward them when you're honest with them. So for example, let's say they do something really stupid and they really need to know the truth, but it's actually not easy to tell them truth about that thing. But you, as a real friend, say, I'm going to take the hit. I'm not going to just flatter them or just ignore the topic. I'm going to be honest with them because they need to know for their own benefit. Right? So there's a situation in which you're performing a virtuous deed that's good for you because you're doing the right thing. And it's good for them because they need the truth about whatever it is. Right? You can come up with the example. And of course, those actions with one another contribute to each other's happiness. And of course, Aristotle is ultimately going to say the highest form of interaction is contemplating. And he talks about how, two people are better to think than one person. And that, philosophical contemplation isn't just like someone meditating by themselves, on a yoga mat. It's interacting with one another. And it might well be like having conversation about, the big questions of existence and things of that nature or of life, right? So complete friendship is going to contribute to our happiness. And there's an interesting question as whether complete friendship like almost is happiness or whether it's just a means to happiness. And that question is, it's not totally clear. And it's certainly not clear by book 8, right? But certainly we're helping each other up. I don't know if life is like a long ladder up to the happiness. we're helping each other up the ladder on the way together. We're working hand in glove as complete friends, because we're concerned about the other person in a way we're not in the other relationships. Okay. So next week, I think we're going to do one more week with this book, and we're going to look at book 9, because now that we have these 3 types of friendship, I think pretty clear, and all the various facets of them that are important to understand, we're going to look at some real world situations that Aristotle talks about in book 9 that complicates things and makes things a little more rich in terms of like real world experience, as opposed to just looking at these 3 categories, right? Oh crud. How can we do attendance? Could everybody just do this for attendance? Just email me. I think that's the simplest thing to do at this point. Are we good?
Okay.
Yeah, just let me know.
All right.
I'll mark it off.
Okay, good
All
night.
right, that sounds
Good
good,
night,
Professor. Thank you so much.
All right, have a great night.
Have a good night. Take care.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Hi, Professor.
Yes.
I just got I
Have a
have
nice
a
night,
quick
people.
question. It's about the assignment. I don't know, for some reason, the first question is just kicking my behind, and I'm late on my assignment. I have my questions answered. It's just the first one.
Yeah.
Can you just clarify the question for me? For some reason, I'm just not getting it. You said, explain the process by which human beings achieve virtue. And then you said, this, then we have to, I guess, explain decision, deliberation, character, virtue, and happiness. So I'm just kind of a little bit lost.
Okay. So those things come from books 2 and 3. So let's just kind of run over it. In book 1, he says happiness is basically living virtuously. And then in books 2 and 3, he starts to explain not specific examples of virtue like courage or moderation or justice. He just talks about how an action can be virtuous. And there are various components to it. And I think the key thing is that Diego, yeah, just for a moment, that those things are discussed in books 2 and 3. And if you look there, you'll see the answers.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
There's a process that you can't just do anything and be virtuous. It has to be done in a certain way. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Okay. Great.
A question, Dr. Marta.
Yes.
Do you teach this class in a different time, like earlier, or it's just this?
No, so I just have this slot, and I said it at the beginning of the semester, like this is really the only feasible time to do this. And of course, I'm taping it, I'm recording it. So if you can't make it, I always
Because the reason why I asked, I'll be in a different time zone from next week for like 3 weeks.
Okay.
I'll be in Germany.
Okay.
So it will be like 3 a.m. there. So it's gonna be really hard. But
Got
since
it.
you're gonna be a recording,
I get it.
I can log in and then just for the presence and then log back out because it's gonna be super late there.
Okay.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
If you can't, it's not obligatory. So you've got the video.
Believe me, Professor, I like to be on this Zoom because I understand more of the class than just like doing paperwork.
Absolutely.
It makes more sense.
I can't imagine anybody understanding.
That's the reason why I'm all the way. I'm here till now. I'm packing my luggage, and I don't mind. It's very interesting. You what do you call that? You break more ground when you explain things.
I hope so. That's the
yeah, of course,
That's
definitely.
why we're meeting. That's why we meet.
Yes.
I can't imagine enjoying a class just doing online work. Oh my goodness, miserable.
Yeah, it's different when you're doing just the recording. It's like, you're not participating, so it's kind of boring. That's why sometimes I don't like to be present in class, since that's what we have.
Got it.
Yeah, thank you anyway.
You're welcome.
I'll do my best. Have
Yep.
a good night.
Yep.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night. Jessley, you have a question? Diego, you want to talk?
Yeah. Oh, by the way, you're still recording.
Yes, that was just what I was about to do.